Lena never thought her quiet life would ever cross paths with someone like Ethan Caldwell. She was the kind of girl who blended into the background, soft-spoken, kind-hearted, and always putting others before herself. She worked part-time at a local bookstore, cared for her aging parents, and spent most of her time helping her older sister, Clara, with whatever she needed. Clara was everything Lena wasn't. Beautiful, confident, and ambitious, she walked into every room like she owned it. People noticed her instantly. Her laughter, her style, the way she could charm anyone she met. While Lena wore plain clothes and tied her hair back in a simple bun, Clara dressed like she belonged in a fashion magazine. Their parents adored Clara. She was their pride, their shining example of success. When Clara announced that she was engaged to Ethan Caldwell, a wealthy businessman known for his intelligence and charm, the entire family felt as though they had stepped into a dream. It was the kind of fairy tale engagement people in small towns only read about in magazines. Lena had met Ethan only a few times before the engagement. He was polite, reserved, and had a quiet smile that made people feel at ease. Though he came from money, he never flaunted it. When he spoke, he listened too, something Clara rarely did. Their engagement party was held at the Caldwell estate, a grand mansion with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and manicured gardens that looked like something out of a movie. Lena helped with the decorations, quietly moving around the edges of the room, adjusting flowers and lighting candles while Clara basked in the attention of guests and photographers. At one point, Lena saw Ethan standing by the balcony watching the sunset. He looked tired, as if the endless small talk had worn him down. She hesitated before walking over. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" she said softly. Ethan turned and smiled faintly. "It is, but I think the stars will look even better once the crowd leaves." Lena laughed lightly, and for a brief moment, there was something easy and human about him, not the serious businessman everyone else saw. But then Clara called his name from across the hall, and that small connection vanished as quickly as it appeared. From that day on, Lena stayed out of their way. She helped with the wedding plans, choosing flowers, arranging guest lists, helping Clara try on dresses, but she never let herself think about Ethan again. He belonged to her sister, and that was the end of it. Still deep down, she sometimes wondered if he was truly happy. Clara often complained that Ethan wasn't romantic enough or didn't buy her the right kind of gifts. She said he was too busy with work, too serious, too predictable, but Lena always thought there was something admirable about him, the way he cared quietly without making a show of it. As the wedding drew closer, their parents became obsessed with every detail. They wanted perfection. After all, their daughter was marrying a millionaire. They wanted the whole town to see that their family had made it. Lena went along with it all, even when she felt invisible at her own sister's engagement celebrations. A week before the wedding, Lena helped Clara pack her honeymoon luggage. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone while Lena carefully folded dresses and placed them into the suitcase. "You're so quiet today," Clara said suddenly without looking up. "I'm just tired," Lena replied with a smile. "Long day." Clara put her phone down and sighed. "You know, you should really do something about yourself.
Get out more.
Meet someone. You can't stay single forever." Lena laughed softly. "Not everyone finds their millionaire fiancé by chance." Clara smirked. "Luck favors the bold, little sister. You have to go after what you want." Lena wanted to say she didn't want a millionaire or a perfect life, just peace, love, and a little kindness. But she stayed silent. That night, as the house grew quiet, Lena couldn't sleep. She walked to the living room and looked at the wedding invitations stacked neatly on the table. Clara and Ethan's smiling faces stared back at her from the glossy paper. They looked so perfect together, the kind of couple people put on magazine covers. But something inside her ached, not from jealousy, but from an odd sense of fear. She didn't know why. Maybe it was just nerves about the upcoming wedding. Maybe it was the feeling that something was about to change, something she couldn't stop. 3 days before the wedding, tragedy struck. Lena was at the bookstore when she got the call. Her mother's voice was trembling on the phone. "Lena, there's been an accident." "Clara and Ethan." The world blurred. Lena dropped the book she was holding and ran out of the store without even asking for details. Her heart pounded as she reached the hospital, her hands shaking uncontrollably. In the emergency room, she saw her parents crying, surrounded by doctors. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. "What happened?" she asked, barely able to speak. Her father looked at her with tear-filled eyes. "Their car? It went off the road. Clara! She didn't make it." The words hit Lena like a storm. For a moment, everything went silent. No sounds, no thoughts, just emptiness. "And Ethan?" she whispered. "He's alive," her mother said. "But he's in a coma. They don't know if he'll wake up." Lena's knees gave way and she sank to the floor. She had just lost her sister, and the man who had almost become part of their family was now between life and death. Days turned into weeks. The funeral came and went like a blur. Clara's picture stood surrounded by white lilies, her smile frozen forever in time. People whispered about how cruel life could be, how unfair it was that such a young couple's love story ended before it began. Lena stood silently beside her parents, holding their hands, trying to be strong for them. But inside she was breaking. She missed Clara, her laughter, her arrogance, even her teasing. The house felt painfully empty without her. Every few days, Lena visited Ethan at the hospital. He lay motionless, hooked up to machines, his face pale but peaceful. The doctor said there was hope, small, but still there. She sat by his bedside, sometimes reading to him, sometimes just talking softly. She told him about the bookstore, about how the sky looked that morning, about how much everyone wanted him to get better. She didn't know why she kept going. Maybe it was guilt that she was alive when others weren't. Maybe it was the promise she made silently at Clara's grave, that she would look after Ethan until he recovered. The Caldwells, Ethan's family, were kind but distant. His mother, a graceful woman with silver hair and a calm voice, often sat quietly beside Lena during visits. She would thank Lena for being there and say little else. One afternoon, Lena found Mrs. Caldwell sitting alone in the hospital corridor, staring at the floor. Her eyes were red from crying. "Are you all right?" Lena asked gently. Mrs. Caldwell looked up, her voice trembling. "He was supposed to get married next week. Everything was ready. The ceremony, the guests. And now—" She stopped, her lips quivering. Lena sat beside her. "He'll wake up. I know he will." Mrs. Caldwell smiled weakly. "You have such faith. I wish I could believe that." They sat in silence for a while. The sound of beeping machines and footsteps echoed down the hall. Weeks turned into months. Ethan's condition didn't change. He was stable but unresponsive. The doctor said it could take time, weeks, months, or even years. The media began to lose interest. The reporters who once crowded the hospital entrance moved on to other stories, but Lena stayed. Every evening after work, she came to sit by Ethan's bed. She brought him books, played soft music, and talked to him as if he could hear. One evening, as she was leaving, Mrs. Caldwell stopped her. "Lena," she said quietly, "could we talk privately?" They sat in the small hospital garden, surrounded by dim lights and the soft hum of crickets. Mrs. Caldwell looked exhausted, her hands trembling slightly. "There's something I need to ask you," she began slowly. "It's unusual, but I have no choice." Lena frowned, unsure what she meant. "My son's company, his inheritance. It's complicated," Mrs. Caldwell said. "There's a legal clause. If Ethan isn't married by the end of this quarter, everything will transfer to his uncle. It was his father's doing, part of a family agreement. It sounds ridiculous, but the lawyers are clear. If he isn't legally married before the deadline, he loses control of the company." Lena stared at her in confusion. "But Clara was supposed to marry him." "Yes," Mrs. Caldwell said softly. "That's why we're in this mess. The wedding didn't happen, but if someone else were to marry him, the contract would hold." Lena blinked, trying to understand. "Someone else?" Mrs. Caldwell's eyes filled with tears. "I wouldn't ask this of you if there were another way, but you're the only one who truly cared for him after the accident. The only one who's been here every day. If you agreed to a quiet legal ceremony, just on paper, we could protect everything Ethan worked for. When he wakes up, we'll explain. He'll understand." Lena's breath caught in her throat. The thought was unthinkable. Marrying her sister's fiancé? It felt wrong, impossible. "I can't," she whispered. "It wouldn't be right." Mrs. Caldwell reached for her hand. "Please, Lena. You'd be saving not just the company, but his future. And we'd make sure your parents never have to worry about anything again. They've suffered enough." Lena felt torn apart. Her heart pounded. She wanted to say no, to walk away. But then she thought of her parents, their tired faces, their debts, the way they had lost Clara and nearly everything else. That night, Lena went home in silence. Her mother was waiting for her in the kitchen. Mrs. Caldwell called, her mother said softly. She told us what she asked of you. Lena's eyes widened. You know? Her father spoke quietly. Lena, this could help all of us. It would only be temporary, just until Ethan wakes up. You'd be helping him, helping his family, helping us. Lena looked at them in disbelief. You really think Clara would want this? Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Clara is gone, sweetheart. But maybe this is a way to honor her memory. You'd be doing it for her. Lena sat in silence, her heart heavy. The night felt endless. She thought about Ethan lying in that hospital bed, about Clara's smiling face in old photos, about her parents' tired voices. By morning, she had made her decision, one that would change her life forever. She returned to the hospital, pale and quiet, and found Mrs. Caldwell waiting in the corridor. I'll do it, Lena said softly. I'll marry him. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you, dear. You're doing the right thing. The next day, a small group gathered in Ethan's hospital room. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. Just a priest, a lawyer, Mrs. Caldwell, and Lena. Ethan lay unconscious as the priest spoke the vows. Lena's voice trembled as she repeated them, her eyes glistening with tears. When it was over, Mrs. Caldwell placed a simple gold ring on Lena's finger. The papers were signed. The marriage was official. Lena stood by Ethan's bedside, looking at his still face. She whispered softly, I hope someday you'll understand. And for the first time in her life, Lena realized that her path, quiet, simple, and predictable, had just changed forever. The day after the quiet hospital ceremony, Lena woke up and for a long moment couldn't remember what had happened. Her small apartment looked the same. Sunlight on the wall, her half-open closet door, the sound of traffic outside. But then she looked at her hand and saw the thin gold band on her finger. Her heart sank. It wasn't a dream. She was now married to her sister's fiancé. Not in the way she ever imagined. Not out of love, not even out of choice, but out of desperation, compassion, and guilt. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the ring between her fingers. It felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. Later that morning, she went to the hospital. The nurses greeted her kindly now. They all knew who she was. Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell, one of them said with a smile. Lena almost corrected her out of instinct, but then she remembered. That was her name now. Good morning, she murmured, her voice soft. When she entered Ethan's room, everything felt different. The same beeping of machines, the same faint scent of antiseptic, but the air around her felt heavier now. She sat beside him and whispered, It's official. We're married, but you already know that in your own way, don't you? She smiled sadly, even though he couldn't hear her. Mrs. Caldwell came in later with some legal papers and thanked her again. I know this wasn't easy, she said. You did something brave, Lena. My son would be grateful if he could see what you've done. Lena forced a smile, but inside she felt nothing like brave. She felt like an imposter wearing someone else's name. When the lawyers confirmed that the marriage was valid, the family's business and assets were secured. The media never found out. Everything was kept quiet. Only a few people knew, and all of them agreed to stay silent. Mrs. Caldwell arranged for Lena to move into one of the Caldwell family's smaller properties, a large house outside the city, surrounded by tall trees and guarded gates. You should stay there, she said. It'll be safer, and you'll have everything you need. Lena didn't argue. She packed her few clothes and books and left her old apartment behind. When she stepped into the mansion for the first time, she felt like she didn't belong. The floors gleamed like glass. The rooms were filled with expensive furniture. And everywhere she turned, she saw photos of Ethan, smiling, confident, alive. She felt like a shadow walking through someone else's life. Her room overlooked the garden, where the roses were blooming. Every morning she made herself tea and tried to read, but her mind kept wandering back to the hospital. So she continued her visits, and every day without fail. Sometimes she talked to Ethan about her day, about the book she was reading or the weather. Other times she just sat in silence, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. There were days when she felt hopeful, like he might open his eyes any second. And there were nights when she sat in her new bedroom, crying quietly because she wasn't sure how long she could live like this. She didn't tell anyone about the loneliness. Her parents were proud. For the first time in their lives, they didn't have to worry about bills or debts. Her mother often called to ask how things were, and Lena always said, "Everything's fine, Mom," but it wasn't fine. At dinner one evening, Mrs. Caldwell looked across the table and said, "You can call me Helen, dear. You're part of the family now." Lena nodded politely, but she didn't feel like family. She felt like a stranger filling a space that wasn't meant for her. Helen seemed kind, but her eyes often carried a distant sadness. She would talk about Ethan's childhood, about how hard he had worked to build his company, about his late father's expectations. "He always wanted to do things his own way," she said one night, stirring her tea. "That's why this marriage clause made him so angry. He didn't want to be forced into anything." Lena looked down, unsure how to respond. "He doesn't seem like someone who needs forcing." Helen smiled faintly. "You're right. That's why I think he chose your sister. She was the kind of woman who could challenge him." She paused, then added softly, "But I also think he would have liked your honesty." Lena didn't know what to say. She just nodded and sipped her tea. Days turned into weeks again. She got used to the silence of the house, the sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the smell of coffee every morning from the kitchen. Sometimes she found herself walking through the rooms just to feel less lonely. She would stop at the study, Ethan's office, where his desk still had papers and notes scattered about. There was a photo of Clara and Ethan on the corner, taken at some event. Clara was smiling brightly, Ethan's arm around her. Lena looked at it for a long time, her chest tightening. She whispered, "You loved her so much." I hope she knew that. She never touched the photo. She just stood there remembering. One afternoon, she was at the hospital when one of the doctors approached her. "Mrs. Caldwell, may I speak with you?" he asked politely. She followed him into his office, her heart racing. "We've done more tests," the doctor said. "Ethan's condition is stable." "That's good, but there's been no significant change. So, he might not wake up soon?" she asked softly. The doctor sighed. "It's impossible to say. He could wake up tomorrow or in months, or not at all. But he's strong, that gives us hope." Lena nodded, though her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, doctor." When she returned to Ethan's room, she sat beside him and held his hand gently. "You hear that?" she whispered. "They said you're strong. That's a good sign, right?" She smiled through her tears. "You just have to keep fighting a little longer. I'll be right here." Sometimes she thought she saw his fingers twitch or his breathing change and her heart would jump. But then everything went still again. As weeks passed, the world outside moved on. People forgot about the accident. The company continued to run, thanks to the lawyers and board members managing it in Ethan's name. Helen kept busy with business meetings and Lena stayed quietly in the background, living between the hospital and the house. One evening, she walked through the garden after sunset. The air was cool and fireflies danced above the grass. She thought about her life before all of this. The bookstore, the laughter of customers, the smell of paper and ink. Everything had been simple then. Now she lived in a mansion, married to a man in a coma. She wondered what people would think if they knew the truth. Would they call her selfless? Or would they think she was chasing money? The thought made her sick. She looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Clara, if you can hear me, I hope I'm doing the right thing." The wind rustled the trees, and she felt tears run down her cheeks. A few days later, Helen came home from a meeting looking worried. "We may have a problem," she told Lena. "What happened?" "Ethan's uncle. He's questioning the legality of the marriage. He's saying it was done under false circumstances. If he convinces the board, everything could still fall apart." Lena's heart raced. "But the marriage is legal, isn't it?" "The papers, yes, the papers are valid. But he's trying to say it was unethical. He wants control of the company." Helen took a deep breath and added, "He's dangerous when it comes to money, Lena. We have to stay strong." For the first time, Lena realized how much was at stake. This wasn't just about business. It was about loyalty, trust, and survival. The next few weeks were tense. Lawyers came and went from the house. Lena stayed out of their way, spending more time at the hospital. She felt safer there, sitting beside Ethan, reading to him in the quiet room while the chaos brewed outside. One night, she brought a small speaker and played his favorite classical music, something she had learned from Helen. As the soft notes filled the air, she closed her eyes and imagined him opening his eyes, smiling at her, asking why she looked so tired. But when she opened her eyes, he was still motionless. Still, she didn't give up. "Maybe you're tired too," she whispered. "It's okay. I'll wait." One morning, when she arrived at the hospital, a nurse greeted her with excitement. "Mrs. Caldwell!" His fingers moved again today, more than before. Lena froze, her eyes wide. "Really?" "Yes, we think it's progress." She rushed to his room and sat beside him, her heart pounding. She took his hand and whispered, "Ethan, it's me. Can you hear me? It's Lena." For a moment she thought she saw his eyelids flicker. It was brief, almost like a dream, but it was enough to fill her heart with hope. She ran to tell Helen, who smiled for the first time in weeks. "Maybe your voice reached him," she said softly. "Maybe you're the reason he's fighting to come back." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by her window thinking about how much had changed. When she had agreed to marry Ethan, she had done it to help his family, to protect her parents. But now, something deeper had taken root. A quiet connection she couldn't explain. She didn't know if it was love or guilt, or something in between. But she knew that she cared about him more than she should. The next morning, when she entered his room, she saw a new nurse adjusting his IV. "Good morning," she said. The nurse smiled. "He's a lucky man," she said. "You come here every day." "Not everyone would do that," Lena smiled faintly. "I made a promise." When the nurse left, Lena sat down and whispered, "You see, Ethan? Even strangers can tell you're lucky. But the truth is, I think I'm the lucky one. Because somehow, even though you can't speak, you've taught me more about patience and kindness than anyone ever did." She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and added softly, "When you wake up, I'll tell you everything. How we got here, why I said yes, and maybe then you'll forgive me." Outside, rain began to fall against the hospital window. The sound was soft and steady. For a long time, Lena just sat there listening, to the rain, to the machines, to the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. It was the only sound that truly mattered to her anymore, and deep inside she made another silent promise. She would stay, no matter how long it took, no matter what anyone said, because even if he never opened his eyes again, she couldn't walk away. It wasn't about contracts or promises anymore. It was about something purer, a quiet, human connection that didn't need words to exist. That night, when she returned home, she sat by the window again and looked at the gold ring on her finger. For the first time since the day she wore it, she didn't feel the same heaviness. Maybe it wasn't just a symbol of what she lost, maybe. Somehow it had become a symbol of what she was learning. Strength, loyalty, and the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. And as she drifted to sleep, she whispered a quiet prayer, for Ethan, for Clara, and for the strange, unexpected life she was now living. The days began to blend into each other. The same long drives to the hospital, the same quiet walks through the white corridors, the same sight of Ethan lying still with his eyes closed. But something inside Lena had changed. She no longer went out of duty or guilt. She went because she wanted to. Sitting beside him made her feel less lonely. His silent presence gave her a strange kind of peace. Sometimes she brought books to read out loud, simple stories about hope, forgiveness, and love. Sometimes she just talked about her day. She told him how the roses in the garden were blooming again, how the rain had flooded the driveway, how his mother had finally smiled after weeks of worry. Even though he couldn't answer, she always waited for a moment before leaving, as if expecting him to say something back. One afternoon, Helen asked her to stay home from the hospital. "You've been running yourself down, dear," she said gently. "You need rest." Lena tried to argue, but Helen wouldn't listen. "Ethan will still be there tomorrow," she said. "He's not going anywhere." So Lena stayed home that day. She tried to read, tried to cook, but nothing felt right. The house was too quiet. Every tick of the clock reminded her that she wasn't where she was supposed to be. That evening, Helen joined her for dinner. "The lawyers say the board issue is almost settled," she said with relief. "Once the documents are finalized, everything will be secure again." "That's good," Lena said softly. Helen studied her for a moment. "You've changed since the wedding," she said. "You're quieter, but stronger somehow." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe life forces you to be strong when you have no other choice." Helen nodded thoughtfully. "Do you ever regret saying yes?" Lena hesitated. "Sometimes I wonder if Clara would be angry with me, but then I think maybe she'd understand. I didn't do it for money or for name. I did it because it felt like the right thing to do." Helen reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. "You've been a blessing to this family, Lena. Don't ever doubt that." The next morning she returned to the hospital early. The moment she stepped into Ethan's room, she froze. There were two nurses standing near his bed, whispering urgently. One of them turned to her and smiled. "Mrs. Caldwell, good morning. We were just saying, and his vitals look stronger today." "Stronger?" she asked, her heart racing. "Yes. His brain activity has improved slightly. It's a good sign." Lena felt her knees weaken. She hurried to his bedside and took his hand. "You're really fighting, aren't you?" she whispered. "I knew you would." She sat there for hours watching him, refusing to leave even when visiting hours ended. The nurse finally convinced her to rest, promising to call if there was any change. When she got home, Helen met her at the door, her face tense. "I just got a call from the hospital board," she said. "Ethan's uncle is still trying to cause trouble." "He wants to meet you." "Me?" Lena asked, surprised. "Yes, he wants to see the woman who married my son in a hospital room." Lena felt uneasy. She had seen him only once before, a tall, stern man with cold eyes. "What does he want?" Helen sighed. "Probably to scare you. But don't worry, I'll be there too." The next afternoon they met at a quiet cafe near the hospital. Ethan's uncle arrived wearing a dark suit and carrying a smug smile. He looked at Lena from head to toe and said, "So you're the girl." Lena felt her stomach twist, but she stayed calm. "I'm his wife," she said softly. The man chuckled. "Legally, maybe. But don't think for a second that makes you family. You married a man who doesn't even know your name." Helen glared at him. "That's enough," but he continued. "Do you really think this marriage will stand once he wakes up?" "If he wakes up?" Lena said nothing. She didn't trust her voice. The man leaned closer. "You may fool my sister, but you won't fool me. When he wakes up, he'll see right through you." He left soon after, his words hanging in the air like poison. Helen reached over and squeezed Lena's hand. "Don't listen to him. He's bitter and cruel. You did nothing wrong." But that night his words echoed in Lena's mind. "When he wakes up, he'll see right through you." She lay awake staring at the ceiling. What if he did wake up and hated her for what she'd done? What if he thought she took advantage of him? The thought terrified her. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. Lena arrived at the hospital early, as usual. She greeted the nurses, walked down the familiar hallway, and opened the door to Ethan's room. For a second, she thought she imagined it. His eyes were open. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The world seemed to stop around her. "Ethan?" she whispered, stepping closer. He blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused, confused. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Lena pressed the call button, and within moments, nurses and doctors rushed in. They surrounded the bed, checking his vitals, shining lights into his eyes, speaking in quick tones. Lena stood back, trembling, tears streaming down her face. "He's awake," one of the doctors said with a smile. "He's actually awake." Helen arrived a few hours later, breathless and crying. She hugged Lena tightly. "You stayed," she whispered. "You never gave up. You were right. He came back." The next few days were a blur of tests and checkups. Ethan was weak and barely spoke, but the doctors said his recovery looked promising. Lena stayed by his side, helping however she could. When he was finally allowed to sit up, she held his hand and said softly, "Welcome back." He looked at her for a long moment, his brow furrowed. "Who are you?" Her smile faded. "I'm Lena," she said gently. "I've been taking care of you." He frowned, trying to remember. "Where's Clara?" The words hit her like a knife. She swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes. She didn't make it. For a long moment there was silence. Then he turned away, closing his eyes. Helen stepped in quickly, comforting him as he broke down. Lena stepped back, her heart aching. In the days that followed, Ethan began physical therapy. He spoke very little and seemed distant. He didn't ask about the marriage, and no one dared to bring it up yet. One evening, Helen asked Lena to join them for dinner at the hospital cafeteria. Ethan sat quietly, pushing food around his plate. When Lena tried to start a conversation, he looked at her coldly. "You were here all this time?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "Every day," he nodded slowly. "Why?" Lena hesitated. "Because you needed someone." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "And you volunteered?" Helen tried to intervene, but Lena shook her head. "It's all right," she said quietly. Ethan looked away. "You didn't have to do that. I didn't ask for it." That night, when she got home, she sat by the window again, staring at the stars. She had imagined this moment for months. Him waking up, talking to her, thanking her. But now that it had happened, it hurt more than she ever expected. She didn't blame him for being angry or confused. He had lost his fiancée, his memory was shattered, and his life was turned upside down. But still, the coldness in his eyes broke her heart. In the following days, Ethan grew stronger, but his attitude toward her stayed the same. Distant, polite, but cold. He thanked the nurses, smiled at the doctors, but barely spoke to Lena. One afternoon, she overheard him talking to Helen. "I want to go home," he said. "I can't stay here anymore." Helen nodded. "We'll make arrangements." When Lena entered the room, Ethan turned to her. "You don't need to come tomorrow," he said flatly. "I'll be fine." Her heart dropped. "I wasn't coming for you to thank me," she said quietly. "I came because I wanted to." He didn't respond. He just looked away. The next week, Ethan returned home. Helen insisted that Lena move back into the house to help during his recovery. Ethan didn't object, but he kept his distance. He spent most of his time in the study, reading or working on his laptop. Lena stayed mostly in her room or in the garden. Sometimes she passed him in the hallway, and he would nod politely, nothing more. One evening, she found him in the garden, staring at the roses. She hesitated before walking over. "They're your favorites, right?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. "How do you know that?" "Your mother told me," she said softly. He nodded and went back to looking at the flowers. "It's strange," he murmured. "Everything looks the same, but nothing feels familiar anymore." Lena wanted to say something comforting, but she couldn't find the right words. She simply stood beside him in silence. After a moment, he said quietly, "I heard you've been living here, and that you've been helping my mother." "Yes," she said. "She needed someone." He turned to her. "You're very kind, Lena, but you don't owe us anything. You should live your own life." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe this is my life now." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to read something in her face. Then he said softly, "You remind me of Clara sometimes." The words stung, though he didn't mean them unkindly. Later that night, Lena sat in her room and thought about everything that had happened. She had spent months caring for a man who didn't know she existed, and now that he was awake, she was the last person he wanted near him. But she couldn't be angry. She understood his pain. She thought about leaving, packing her things and returning to her old life. But something inside her wouldn't let her go. Not yet, because even if he didn't see it now, she knew that deep down, the bond they shared, through tragedy, silence, and time, couldn't be erased that easily. And maybe, just maybe, one day he would see her not as a stranger wearing his ring, but as someone who had truly cared for him when no one else did. For now, all she could do was wait, quietly, patiently, just like before, because she had learned something over those long, lonely months. Sometimes love doesn't need to be returned to be real. It just needs to be true. The days at the Caldwell mansion felt heavier than ever for Lena. Ethan had returned home, but his presence was cold, distant, and unwelcoming. Every step she took in the house reminded her that she was living in a life that wasn't truly hers. She tried to help in small ways, cooking meals, tidying up rooms, making sure everything ran smoothly, but every gesture seemed invisible to him. He moved through the house with purpose, but always with an edge, a quiet tension that hung in the air. He avoided her gaze, barely spoke to her, and often retreated to his study or the garden for hours on end. Lena noticed the way he flinched when someone mentioned Clara's name, or when photographs of her were brought up. It was clear he was trying to process the loss in his own way. One afternoon, she was arranging flowers in the hallway when Ethan appeared unexpectedly. He had a folder in his hands and his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Lena," he said, his tone clipped. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, though she feared it. "Of course," she replied, setting down the vase. He gestured toward the study. "Sit," he commanded, though not unkindly. Lena obeyed, her stomach tight. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her. You married me while I was in a coma. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Lena swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "I didn't do it for me. I did it for you, for your family, for my parents. You were in danger of losing everything, and I wanted to make sure that didn't happen." Ethan's jaw tightened. "But I didn't ask you. I didn't agree to any of this. How could anyone think this was acceptable? I never thought it would be easy," Lena admitted softly. "I never thought it would be simple. I only wanted to protect you, and everyone else." He paced the room, frustration radiating from him. "Protect me?" "I was lying there, unconscious. I couldn't consent. You married me when I had no choice." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I know, I understand. And I'm sorry, but if I hadn't, you could have lost everything your family worked for. I never wanted to take anything from you. I only wanted to make sure you had a chance when you woke up." He stopped pacing and looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to see through her soul. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And my sister, Clara, you're her replacement. I don't know if I can ever see you as anything else." Lena's chest tightened. "I can't be Clara, I never wanted to be. I only wanted to help you in the way I could." He nodded slowly, though he didn't look convinced. "And yet here you are, living in my house, doing everything for me, day after day. I can't decide if I should be grateful or resentful." She looked down at her hands. "You can feel both," she said quietly. "It's human. I don't blame you." Over the next few weeks, their interactions remained tense. Lena kept a careful distance, only speaking when necessary. She moved silently through the house, avoiding anything that might provoke him while still ensuring he had everything he needed. But slowly, tiny changes began to emerge. He no longer flinched at her presence. He began to answer simple questions politely, though his tone remained guarded. He would ask for meals she prepared or request small favors, and though it wasn't warm, it was an acknowledgement of her role in his life. One evening, Lena found him in the garden, staring at the sky. She hesitated before approaching. "The stars are bright tonight," she said softly. He didn't answer at first. Then in a low voice he said, "They were Clara's favorites, weren't they?" "Yes," Lena said quietly. "She loved watching them with you." He looked at her, the edge in his expression softening slightly. "Did you really care for her?" "Yes," Lena admitted. "And I still care about you, but not the same way. You were asleep. You didn't know, but I stayed because I wanted to see you have a chance at life again. That's all." He was silent, absorbing her words. For the first time, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between them slowly began to change. It was subtle, a softer glance, a nod, a brief conversation that didn't feel forced. Lena didn't expect gratitude or warmth. She only hoped for recognition of her sincerity. One morning, Ethan invited her to join him in the study. "I want to talk about the company," he said. His tone was professional, but it carried a weight of acknowledgement she hadn't seen before. Lena helped him review contracts and correspondence. For hours, they worked side by side, occasionally exchanging comments or suggestions. It was different from before. He included her in decisions, asked her opinion, and even laughed softly at a small joke she made. That night, Lena reflected on the day as she sat by the window. The progress was slow, but it was real. For the first time, she felt a tiny sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could eventually see her as more than the woman who had married him in a coma. Then, a turning point came unexpectedly. Ethan asked to see her alone in the garden. She arrived to find him sitting on the stone bench, hands clasped together, staring at the roses. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. "Why did you really marry me?" Lena took a deep breath, her heart racing. "I told you the truth before. I did it to protect you and your family. But if I'm being completely honest, I also stayed because I cared. I cared about you as a person. Not as a husband or a replacement for Clara, just you." He was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on the flowers. You stayed all this time through everything and you never left? No, Lena said. I couldn't. Not when you were lying there, not when you needed someone. I didn't expect anything in return. I just wanted to help. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. Confusion, sorrow, but also a spark of recognition. I didn't know, he whispered. You weren't awake, she said softly. You had no way of knowing. But I was here. Every day, I never stopped caring. He nodded slowly as if trying to understand a truth that had been hidden from him. And the marriage? Did it mean anything to you? Lena's fingers tightened around the hem of her dress. It meant responsibility at first, but over time, it became more. It became hope. Hope that you would come back. That somehow, even after everything, you'd see that someone cared enough to stay. He looked at her, eyes glistening. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, Lena replied gently. Just listen. They sat together in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The tension that had defined their relationship for months began to ease. Words were no longer needed. The unspoken connection, built through months of care and patience, began to speak for itself. Over the next few days, Ethan started asking Lena questions about the hospital, the mansion, and even her own life. He wanted to know what she liked, what she had been doing while he was asleep, what she had thought and felt. Slowly, he started sharing small pieces of himself, stories about his childhood, memories of Clara, and fragments of dreams he hadn't remembered. It was the beginning of trust. One evening, as Lena prepared tea in the kitchen, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He hesitated, then asked, "Can we talk?" She set down the tray and followed him to the garden. He gestured to the bench where they had spoken before. "I want to understand," he said. "Everything that happened. Why you stayed, why you agreed to the marriage, everything." Lena sat beside him, her heart pounding. "I've told you the truth before, but I'll say it again. I stayed because I cared. I stayed because I wanted to help. And I stayed because I hoped you would wake up and understand that someone never gave up on you." Ethan's eyes searched hers, and for the first time Lena saw a flicker of gratitude, of something softer beneath the anger and confusion. I don't know if I can ever repay you," he admitted. "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to live. That's enough." The weeks that followed were still filled with challenges. Ethan had to regain his strength, his confidence, and his sense of normalcy. He was often impatient, sometimes irritable, but he began to show glimpses of the man he had been before the accident. Kind, thoughtful, and even occasionally playful. And through it all, Lena remained by his side. She didn't force herself into his life, nor did she expect recognition. She simply existed as a constant presence, a reminder that someone cared, that someone had never left. Slowly, Ethan's attitude shifted. He started to include her in conversations, sought her advice, and even smiled at her in quiet, unexpected moments. He didn't fully trust her yet, but the walls were beginning to crumble. One night, as they walked through the garden together, he stopped and looked at her. "You've been patient, more patient than anyone I've ever known. I can see that now." Lena smiled, her heart swelling. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And because I couldn't walk away." Ethan nodded silently, a quiet understanding passing between them. For the first time, Lena felt a shift not only in him, but in herself. She realized that the bond they had formed through tragedy, care and patience, could not be broken by anger, confusion, or circumstance. And somewhere deep inside, she began to hope that one day he might see her not as a stranger or a replacement, or a woman who married him while he slept, but as someone who had truly loved him all along. The journey was far from over, but the first cracks had appeared in the walls between them. It was a beginning, fragile, tentative, and beautiful, and for Lena, that was enough. The weeks passed quietly, but the tension that had always lingered in the Caldwell mansion began to shift. Ethan was slowly returning to himself. He still carried the shadows of the accident and the loss of Clara, but the edge of anger and confusion that had once defined his gaze softened more and more each day. Lena could feel it, though she never pressed, never forced words or feelings. She had learned patience, and now it was paying off in ways she could barely believe. One morning, Helen approached Lena in the kitchen, her expression serious. "It's time," she said softly. Lena looked up, startled. "Time for what?" Helen gave her a small, sad smile. "Ethan needs to know the whole truth. About the marriage, about why you stayed, everything. You've been honest in your own way, but he deserves to hear it from you directly." Lena nodded, swallowing hard. She had imagined this moment countless times over the months. Each time in her mind, she hoped it would go differently. But now that it was real, her heart raced. "I understand," she whispered. When she entered Ethan's study that afternoon, he looked up from his desk, eyes tired but curious. He gestured for her to sit across from him. "You wanted to talk?" he asked. "Yes," Lena said quietly. "I think it's time you know everything." He leaned back, his expression guarded but attentive. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "When you were in the hospital after the accident, your mother asked me to help. She asked me to marry you, to protect you, your company, and your family. I didn't want to. At first I refused. I couldn't imagine doing something like that. But then I saw how much it meant to everyone. My parents, yours. And I couldn't say no." Ethan's face tightened, a mixture of anger and disbelief flickering across his features. "You married me while I was unconscious." "Yes," she said softly. "It wasn't easy. It wasn't right in the usual sense. But it was necessary. And I stayed. Not for money, not for power, not because I wanted to replace Clara. I stayed because I cared about you. I wanted to make sure you had a chance to come back. To have a life again. That's why I was there every day." He leaned back in his chair, silent, as if trying to process her words. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the edge of the desk. "All this time, you stayed because you cared about me?" Lena nodded, her eyes glistening. "I stayed because I believed in you, because I hoped you would wake up and see that someone never gave up on you, that someone cared even when it seemed impossible." Ethan closed his eyes and let out a long breath. I didn't know," he said, his voice soft. "I thought, when I woke up I would hate whoever did this to me. I thought I would be angry forever." "You don't have to hate me," Lena said gently. "I never wanted your anger. I only wanted to help." For a long time there was silence. Then he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since he had awakened. His eyes, once cold and distant, now held a hint of understanding, even gratitude. "I don't know how to feel," he admitted. Part of me is still angry. But another part sees what you did. And it's, I don't know, incredible." Lena felt a small flicker of hope. "It's not easy for me either," she said softly. "But I don't regret it. I wouldn't change what I did because I knew it was the right thing to do." He nodded slowly, as if trying to memorize every word she said. "I think I understand now. You never wanted to replace Clara. You never wanted to hurt me. You just cared." "Yes," Lena whispered, "and I still do in my own way. I don't expect anything from you, I just want you to know the truth." Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "It's a lot to take in," he admitted. "I keep thinking about Clara, about how everything ended so fast. And now, you stayed. You stayed through it all." Lena nodded. "Yes. And I will continue to stay, not because I have to, but because I want to." For the first time in months, Ethan's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. It was fragile, tentative, but it was real. "I think I might be beginning to see you differently," he said softly. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She dared not hope too much, but a warmth spread through her chest. "That's all I ask," she said quietly. "That you see me as I am, not as someone trying to take Clara's place." The following days were filled with careful conversations. Ethan asked questions about Lena's life, about her parents, about the small details of the months she had spent caring for him. He wanted to know everything, her thoughts, her struggles, her fears. Lena answered honestly, never holding back, never exaggerating. Each answer built trust brick by brick. He began to smile more often, to include her in decisions about the house, the company, and even small personal matters. He no longer flinched when she entered the room. Instead, he would glance up and nod, acknowledging her presence. One evening, as they walked through the garden together, the air filled with the scent of roses, Ethan stopped and looked at Lena. "I've been thinking about everything," he said slowly. "About Clara, about the accident, about us. And I realized something important. Lena's heart thudded in her chest. What is it? He took a deep breath. I realized that you saved me, not just by marrying me, but by being there, by staying, by caring when no one else could. And I can't ignore that. I don't know exactly what this means yet, but I want to try. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. You don't have to figure everything out immediately, she said softly. I'm here and I'll wait as long as it takes. Ethan nodded, and for the first time he reached out and took her hand gently. Not as a gesture of obligation, not as a contract, but as a real human connection. Lena felt warmth spread through her body. It was tentative, delicate, but it was the start of something new, something built on truth, care, and patience. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. Ethan began to open up about his fears and regrets. He spoke about Clara, about the accident, about the months he had been in a coma and the fragments of dreams he barely remembered. Lena listened, never judging, never rushing him. She simply let him speak, let him feel, let him process. One afternoon, as they were sitting together in the study, Ethan looked at her and said, I was so angry when I woke up. Angry at the world, angry at you, angry at myself. But now I see that you were the one constant. You never left. And somehow, that's more than I could have hoped for. Lena smiled, her heart full. I never left because I couldn't. Not when you needed me most.